Good afternoon on today's Angry Bulletin. In a bizarre turn of events, while the Pentagon was trying to debunk any notion that the government has been covering up any sort of reverse engineering UFO project over the last 60 years, at the same time, they quietly and without any sort of explanation revealed a great deal of information from the National Archives. Much of it over 50 years old, and yet all of it involving objects that remain unidentified. What is the Pentagon trying to tell us? All of this and more coming at you on the Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to a special alien edition of the Angry Astronaut. In the media, you may have noticed over the past week or so that the Pentagon released a report detailing their investigation of any sort of reverse engineering project or any sort of covert program that may have been taking place studying crashed alien ships, alien bodies, that sort of thing, and unsurprisingly, the report states that there's absolutely nothing to these rumors, and that is more of a circular pattern of rumors that have been roaming about Washington, the Pentagon, etc. Apparently, rumors that have been shared amongst the same group of people, and as these rumors get circulated, they become more and more extraordinary. Now, of course, this is going to satisfy nobody. It will, of course, satisfy the people who thought that this was always a load of nonsense to begin with, and the people who think that the government is covering something up. Well, of course, a Pentagon investigation into all of this is going to be a cover-up. So, as I say, none of this is really going to satisfy much of anybody, and the Pentagon even admitted that. They said that for the foreseeable future, people are never going to accept any sort of explanation from the government, and people are always going to believe that there's some sort of covert reverse engineering program going on regarding extraterrestrial craft, and maybe someday we'll find out, but certainly not as a result of a government investigation. It'd have to be a whistleblower of some kind, somebody like David Grush, who has a lot more tangible evidence than he was able to present in front of Congress. All of that having been the case, though, interestingly enough, the Pentagon also, very quietly, released a lot of information from the National Archives regarding UFOs, regarding Project Blue Book's investigation, regarding some testimony in terms of what the government actually thought about all of these strange incidents way back in the 1960s, or in some cases the 1950s, and they even included some footage. Now, when you see this footage, well, there's some photographs as well that at least some of them I have never seen before. It's going to be very easy to dismiss these things as being fakes of some kind, or in the case of one particular incident that involved a re-entering rocket, it'll be very easy to dismiss the objects that are seen in that film as, some sort of pieces of debris associated with the re-entry. However, what's important to point out is that there are all kinds of video records of re-entering rockets in the National Archives, dozens and dozens of them actually, and only this one, for some reason, the Pentagon only regarded this one as being significant enough to reproduce on their website and to also state that the objects that were seen in association with this re-entering rocket were indeed unidentified. And interestingly enough, there was another incident involving a re-entering rocket that also had some unidentified objects that were apparently monitoring the re-entry. It's kind of hard to say exactly what was happening, but it was eerily similar to what you're going to see in this footage. So very interesting stuff, and apparently it's only beginning. So what I'm going to show you now is some photographs, some footage that I certainly have never seen before that the Pentagon regards as being unidentified, and also some very interesting accounts that although they happened more than half a century ago, after all this time, still have not been adequately explained.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. Our basic difficulty in dealing with these is that there is no measurement of them that makes it possible for us to put them in any pattern that would be profitable for a deliberate, custom sort of analysis to take the next step. We have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion with respect to this remaining percentage, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate with to any conceivable threat to the United States. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
Watch me for the signal there, sir. Start.
I'll start when you throw it down.
Major Kiho, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
And thus began the UFO controversy that has continued almost unchanged to this very day. The individual you're looking at right now, Donald Kiho, was an American Marine Corps naval aviator who wrote a book called The Flying Saucers Are Real. And after an extensive investigation of a wide variety of sightings, Mr. Kiho came to the same conclusions that UFO investigators have come to today, that whatever these objects are, have exhibited such unusual performance and abilities that seem completely beyond the capabilities of even experimental aircraft that the United States and other nations have produced in recent history, especially in 1950 when his book was released. And some of the photos that we've gotten from this time period are actually kind of remarkably clear given the technology that was available at the time, and this object, at least as far as I know, remains unexplained and just was dragged out of the National Archives and placed on Aero's website for some reason. And in association with all of this, I think it's also worth discussing just how worked up Congress was about all of this back in the 1960s, just as worked up as they are today. At the time, House Minority Leader Gerald R Ford from Michigan said the following. Of course, this is the same Gerald R Ford who would become president later on. He proposed that Congress investigate the rash of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects in southern Michigan and other parts of the country. Ford said that he believed a congressional inquiry would be worthwhile because the American people are becoming alarmed by UFO stories. Quote, "In the light of these new sightings and incidents," Ford said, "it would be a very wholesome thing for a committee of the Congress to conduct a number of hearings and to call responsible witnesses from the executive branch of the government and witnesses witnesses who say they have sighted these objects. I think the American people would feel better if there was a full-blown investigation of these incidents, which some persons allege have taken place. And although, predictably, no congressional investigation actually happened, the first public congressional hearing on the UFO phenomena took place on April 5th of 1966. And by the way, Ford was never satisfied with the official explanations from the U.S. Air Force at the time, who said that it could be dismissed infamously as swamp gas or lights created by the combustion of gases released by a swamp. By the way, the individual who produced that explanation was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who changed his viewpoint radically a few years later and became a UFO investigator and a big believer in the extraterrestrial origin of UFOs. But the most interesting footage posted by the Pentagon recently is this particular footage taken by an aerial camera of an Atlas missile test. Now, on the surface, this doesn't seem to be that unusual of a film. The aerial camera captured the spectacular re-entry of an Atlas missile booster that was launched in September of 1962, together possibly with some of its payloads, although this is a bit unclear. This was the 100th Atlas rocket to be launched from this particular missile firing center off the coast of the Atlantic. The payload, which was just the nose cone of the rocket, weighted down with a dummy payload to simulate a warhead, slammed into the target area near Ascension Island off the west coast of Africa. The rocket also apparently carried two other cameras on its flight into space. They were attached to the missile at an angle to photograph the separation of the booster engines from the main sustainer engine about 2.5 minutes into the flight. The Air Force apparently needed the photographs for its continued study of problems that cropped up in the engine section in the past with this particular missile. Airplanes and ships were stationed downrange in an attempt to recover the cameras and their film, although it was never made 100% clear as to whether or not these particular cameras were actually recovered. If they burnt up, they most probably were not recovered, but if we are to assume that this booster is the main thing that's burning up on the film and then the payload is the secondary object, well, they seem to be following very much the same trajectory. And a little bit later on, you're going to see a third object appear that seems to be paralleling the course of the other objects. Now, once again, this shouldn't strike us as being all that unusual. Missile flights are always very spectacular, so it begs the question, of all the missile re-entries that have happened in the past, why would Aero have included this particular clip on their website as being an unidentified object? Well, the explanation may be found in a story that was published in 1974, associated with a completely unrelated but similar missile test. By the way, this story came out in Huntsville, Alabama. Quote, experts at a missile base say that they are puzzled about strange ghost ships picked up by powerful radar scanners in the Pacific during a tracking exercise last year. There has been little official comment on what the scientists found. The Major Dallas Van Hoos, the Army's base spokesman, confirmed that some unexplained aerial phenomena were observed last August. Scientists, many of whom are reluctant to be named in interviews because of general public skepticism concerning unidentified flying objects, say privately that they have been unable to find an explanation for the ghost ships. We have never seen anything precisely like this before, said one ballistic missile defense expert who works for an Army agency here and is familiar with the advanced radar used to test missiles and warheads. Huntsville houses the Array's Ballistic Missile Defense Systems Command, which analyzes results of missile tests in the Kwajalein Atoll region of the Marshall Island Trust Territory held by the United States. Last August, the Air Force launched a Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile from Vandenberg Air Force Base aimed for the Kwajalein missile range used by the Army, Air Force, and Navy. When the ICBM was screaming towards the Pacific test site, it began its descent on a normal ballistic trajectory, scientists said. The nose cone had separated from the third stage of the missile and was entering the atmosphere at 22,000 feet a second. Radar scanners at the Kwajalein and Mek Islands were tracking the nose cone routinely. At about 400,000 feet, the radar experts in the Pacific found that they were also tracking an unidentified flying object next to the ICBM's nose cone. Radar picked up an inverted, saucer-shaped object to the right and above the descending nose cone and watched it cross the warhead's trajectory to a point which was below and to the left of it before the Phantom disappeared. The ghost ship was described as being 10 feet high and 40 feet long. So far, none of the experts believe the ghost ship was a natural phenomenon caused by freak weather conditions or echoes commonly seen on radar screens. Did a similar event to this 1974 phenomena also take place in 1962? Once again, the Pentagon isn't really talking, and that, of course, is a very frustrating thing indeed. Now, as I say, it would be very easy to dismiss all of this footage as just a bunch of different fragments from a disintegrating Atlas missile burning up in the atmosphere. But as I said before, this sort of thing has happened over and over again. This was actually the 100th test of this particular missile from this particular firing range. Why would the Pentagon single out this one piece of footage unless there was something unusual about it? And that seems to be the case with a lot of the newly released archived information that you can find on the AARO website, including some placeholder spots for some CIA footage that has yet to be digitized. But interestingly, the CIA has given us a spoiler on what's about to be uploaded. Quote, "This unedited film captures the movement of unidentified flying objects in the night sky. Captions indicate that various government agencies that had screened the footage were unable to identify the objects, but it ruled out the possibilities of balloons, aircraft, or birds." You can bet I'm going to keep a close eye on all of that. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and also please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. This is what keeps this content coming, especially as often as I tend to release it. And as always, stay angry about space.